Welcome to the Pitbull Patty Show. This season, we're inviting you to take the Lit Grit Challenge by reading great literature just 1 hour a day, 52 books in 52 weeks to give you the grit you need to succeed. Hey everybody, welcome to the Pitbull Patty Show. I'm Patty Stuckler, joined with Connor Stuckler.
That's right.
So I'm just super excited about covering this book this week. And I gotta say, I was thinking about this. I've got so much going on in my life right now that,
Yep.
and I know you do too.
Me too,
I'm
me too.
like, the last thing I want to do is read. Like, I mean, seriously, hopefully I don't have lipstick on my teeth. Do I got
You're
lipstick
good,
on my
you're
teeth? Okay. I got ready so quick this morning. I'm like feeling a little frazzled. But no, that's the point. Reading is tough, actually.
Yeah,
It's
well,
to
that's
take
why
the
you
time.
gotta have lit grit.
You do. You're right. Maybe you might have been right about that framing of the way that.
I might have been right. I like the sound of
You
that.
might. I said might. I mean, I think you do have to have grit to read. I mean, you really have to have strength of fortitude. You have to really make a conscious decision and that habit. Otherwise, you won't do it. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure I'd be. Well, I already know the answer. I would not probably be reading as much as I'm doing right now.
Yeah, and just a little bit of context. Patty's building a new property down in North Beach. It's taken a whole bunch of time. She's getting ready to sell her house.
Yep.
I just bought a new house. I'm doing total renovations to it. I'm trying to have a gangbusters start of the year as well, as are you. And then I'm also planning a wedding for the end of this year. So we've got a ton going on. So believe us when we say the last thing we want to do is be reading an hour a day. But it's really good. I mean, it's, again, we're kind of having to put our mettle to the test.
Yeah, it really. So I know how difficult it is. I know what we're encouraging people to do is difficult.
Right.
I think that's what we're acknowledging, and we find it difficult. I'm like you, super busy. So sometimes it's like the last thing I want to do is sit there and read for an hour and a half. But the reward that you get, and just what happens when you do read. Now, I'm talking about nonfiction books here, and I'm talking about good nonfiction books. So I do want to make that clarification. Not romance novels, and not that I have anything against those or whatever else that people like to read, suspense or whatever, mystery. I don't particularly read those, but even if you like to do that, it's the nonfiction books, in my humble opinion, as to where all the answers to the big questions in life are.
Yeah, and I think what's great about this book, and it's really timely. I feel like all of our books have been pretty timely. But the one thing, I think, with so much going on in our lives, it's a great book to kind of refocus and refresh on, what our priorities are, and to make sure that we're time blocking, especially with as crazy as our schedules get. So I'm touching on a couple of things in the book, and I think it's a pretty timely.
Yeah, and before we get into kind of the big picture about the book, is really when I've talked to people who say, wow, I really, enjoy your podcast. They'll watch the video one, or on occasion, some people will watch, listen to the MP3 on iTunes. But I almost get this sense that they're like, well, like I'm getting all the information, kind of the gist of it, so I don't need to read the book. The reality is you need to read these books. You really do. We're doing this to encourage people to read,
right.
And it's thankfully making us read.
Right, yeah. I certainly wouldn't have read as many books as I have in the last couple of weeks. That's for sure.
Yeah, so, I mean, it does put a lot of pressure on you to do that, but if you read these books, like this book, the one thing that we're going to be talking about, unless you read it and really delve in and spend the time it takes to read this book and then answer the questions that it talks about and reflect on your life and come to your own life conclusions and purpose, then we can't give that to you.
You're not going to get anything out of it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really important. You have to put in the work, and you have to read these books.
Yeah, so the one thing, it really talks about, there's a lot of books on this, what's your purpose, purpose-driven life. There's a lot of books on that topic. But this book, written by Gary Keller, is fantastic because to me, he breaks it down, and he has a lot of diagrams in the book, as you know.
Yeah.
Which are really, if you're a visual person, which most people are, that kind of helps break down some of the information. But he talks about, like, finding your one thing, your main purpose, And it can be within different realms. Like your one
Right.
thing when it comes to your spirituality, your one thing when it comes to
Your family life.
your family life, your relationships, your one thing when it comes to your business or
Right.
your career. So you find that one thing, that's your big, purpose.
Well, to tie it back to some of the other books too, is Goals with Brian Tracy. He talks about your major definite purpose. So you can start to see there's a lot of overlap with a lot of these books, and so the one thing is, to use Brian Tracy's terminology, is your major definite purpose.
Yeah, that's very true. There's a lot of overlap, and that's why it's important to read these books, because as you read them, it really allows the time that your brain takes to make a shift
Right.
in how your brain is wired and how you think.
And to truly retain the information. I mean, sometimes you got to kind of get beat over the head with something before you actually get it, and that's kind of what this book's, books are doing.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a very good point. You do, because we're stubborn people that, like everybody. Everybody's stubborn.
Well, you're
to a
stuck in
degree.
your ways, and you get in your routines, and you have your habits, and it's hard to kind of reprogram your brain. So you have to put in the work. You have to actually read these books and actually to get what the value from them.
Yeah, well, Keller talks about finding that major purpose, and he gives lots of ways, and we're not going to give you all those. You're going to have to read the book to find them out. All the ways to reflect upon things and ask the questions for you to figure out what is your purpose in life. What drives you? What gets you excited? What would you do for free? That's kind of some of the.
Right.
Now, he doesn't even say some of
Right.
that exactly that way, but that's
Yeah.
how I interpreted it. That really, what gets you excited? Where you'd stay up all night to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So, but then he breaks it down into like really taking that and then niching it down. Go big and then go small.
Mm-hmm.
Down to what is your main priority? That what's the question he always asks in the book throughout? He says the focus question is, what is the one thing that if you did that would make everything else in your life either easier or unnecessary?
Right.
It's such a great question, isn't it?
It's a little wordy, but
it is a little wordy. Yeah, it is.
Like when you asked me right there, and I thought you were going to put me on the spot to remember exactly what it is. I was
And you
like,
thought, ruh-roh. No, I wasn't going to do that to you. I know you've gotten mad at me before when I have. And you're like, oops, I'm not ready. Well, what did you think when you were reading it? What were your thoughts? Because, we haven't talked about, a lot of times we'll talk about these books
Right.
before we're sitting down like this to film, but what we haven't talked about.
Yeah, I'm glad we haven't, just to see how it goes. But I mean, a couple takeaways, like for me. I mean, couple of things, just to back up a little bit. This book actually was recommended to me by a really good friend of mine, Nick DeRubio. His brother had recommended it to him, and he read it. And this was when I first started to get kind of into reading and trying to make reading a habit. And so he actually gave me the book. I got the copy from him. The other thing that was interesting for me was it's Gary Keller, and he's a real estate. He founded Keller Williams, so I thought that was interesting, and that was another reason I wanted to read it, because I'm obviously a real estate professional, and so I thought it would be really good to kind of see what he had to say about productivity and really kind of like personal development and achieving a lot of your goals. The thing that I found really interesting about the book was he talks about 6 lies about like productivity, and 2 of those were really stuck out to me. Like multitasking is basically bullshit.
Yeah.
Multitasking is a lie.
Yeah.
And everything is equal is also a lie, which I thought both of those were big takeaways for me, because I'm always, especially as with real estate, there's a million things going on at any given time. And so I'm constantly multitasking, and it really kind of put things in perspective that, hey, I need to take a step back and really kind of change the way I work, and to really take things one task at a time. Because he talks about if you're doing 2 things at once, you're doing both things poorly.
Well, and it's interesting to expand upon that multitasking, that word that is what's referencing in the
Computer.
60s, computers.
Yeah.
When computers were, and you had the CPU, the central processing unit, that could do multitask, which in reality was, it did tasks so fast, so rapidly, that it appeared that it was doing so many
Right.
things at one time.
It was still doing one thing at a time, just in sequence.
Yeah, kind of like, and he gives an example about a ballerina. Ballerina, when they're doing the, pirouette or whatever, their feet are.
Do I look like a ballerina?
No, do I? Their feet are just moving so rapidly that it appears. So it's you're. But the reality is when you and the more complex the task. Like so, if I'm working on like accounting, which I absolutely hate to do, I hate doing accounting and bookkeeping, but it's a necessary part of
Somebody's
running a
got to do
business.
it.
Yeah, somebody's got to do it, and your dad's not going to do it, so it's left to me. So if I'm doing that, and Caitlin, my assistant ends up distracting me with
Asking you a
something,
question.
asking me, hey, what about this listing? Hey, what do we need to do for whatever? Then it's like he talks about you really need a time block and
Right.
really have whatever the task is, and the more complex, the more important that is. That because your brain, once it takes all this time to then regroup, refocus.
Right. Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. I don't remember the numbers on it, but it was like talking about how much lost productivity there is because your employees are just constantly getting interrupted, and then they're having to refocus and figure out, okay, what would get back into the tasks that they were doing before they got interrupted, and that it leads to hours and hours and lost productivity, which I thought was really interesting and so true. I mean, especially with real estate. The hardest thing I have is figuring out what to do next because there's a million things you could do, and so you got to prioritize them. Sometimes I wish I had somebody just tell me, "Hey, you got to do X, Y, and Z," and then I could just do it. But that's one of the challenges is figuring out what to do next.
Yeah.
And taking that mental energy to figure out. So when you get distracted, it just amplifies that.
Well, so he talks about time blocking, but he says time block, your tasks. First, you got to do the work, the groundwork to figure out what your major purpose is, your big purpose, your one thing.
When he talks about time blocking planning, too,
Yeah.
just you got to time block to plan to time block.
It sounds complicated, but it's really not. I mean, you just have to get out your calendar and say, okay, once you do all the research and you figure out what then your priorities are and the small things that are so essential to accomplishing your big goal, then you need to put that, time, and he suggests 4 hours, which just seems like a really long time, doesn't it?
Yeah.
To do whatever that one thing is. And then he talks about time blocking planning and time blocking time off, which is essential too. But I think, like what you were just saying, I think the average person, we do find it difficult to have the what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of the the vision.
Yes.
That's it. The vision. Yeah. It's I think it's hard for most people to have the vision to really say, okay, this is where I want to go for my life, and then back it down. He talks about that goal setting now or whatever, and he goes back from, okay, here's my 5-year plan, and then what do I need to do within the 1 year, and then what do I need to do? Yeah, all the way to month, to day, to week, and so forth. Yeah. So he breaks it all down into, okay, let's back it, out that way, but that's hard to do. I think it's easier just go eat a sandwich. I mean, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I thought one thing, and to piggyback
TV.
off what you're saying is one of the things I thought was really interesting is he talks about most people's to-do lists are more survival lists. And they're just, instead of setting you up to progress in your career or to take the next steps in whatever your goal is, you're mostly just trying to get through the day. And I thought that was really interesting and really kind of spoke to me because a lot of times especially with real estate, you get a bunch of messages and then all of a sudden you're trying to put out fires. So then it's like you spend your whole day just putting out fires and not actually taking the time to plan and to take the next steps to advance your career and to really reach some of your goals. I thought that was really a good example. Like, most to-do lists are a survival list. I don't know, that really was interesting to me.
Yeah, I thought he had so many great things. And in fact, if you get a chance to read, and I just want to backtrack a little bit as far as like this, we're talking about the one thing here, but and in the end we'll talk about the book that we'll cover for next week. If sometimes we hop around, I can tell you and I, because we're like, our brains we're going over all those things from any particular book. If you read the book ahead of time with us, if you get the opportunity and the chance to do that, please do it. We would encourage you to do it, because if you do that, then it doesn't sound so hop around, I guess.
Right.
Or
it'll make a lot more sense. And you're going to get that much more out of it.
Yeah.
One thing I thought was interesting, too, was one of the 6 lies was that everything is equal. And he talks about the Pareto principle, which is the 80-20 rule, that, 80% of your results are going to come from 20% of your actions. So those 20% of your actions are what you need to time block for and dedicate a lot of your time, which is a resource, to. Because, actions have disproportionate results. And so you need to kind of narrow in on what actions are giving you the highest results, and then focus your time on that, and to really time block and to protect those actions, because those are where the highest productivity comes from.
And that's the hardest part for me, is to protect my time.
Right.
It's hard to say no to all the volunteer things that you can do, or people ask you to do, and you want to do, and so or anything else. I mean, just so many commitments, and as you know, I mean, we've got such a huge family on both sides, so there's always a lot of family obligations. It's really hard to protect your one thing and your task so that you have the time to do them.
Right.
I mean, you can really spend all your time doing everything but that.
Yeah.
So I just thought it was really interesting that he also talks about habits, which we've talked a lot about before.
Yeah.
And he talks about that it's more like 66 days.
Well, that's what I said in one of the earlier podcasts. I couldn't remember what book it was from.
It's probably from this
book,
That it actually takes longer, because some people have, I hear 21 days and lots of other 14 days. And really the reality is the more difficult the habit that you're trying to either acquire or break, it's the longer it's going to take to actually. But 66 he suggests is more the average.
Right.
To do that, to acquire, like to read every day.
Yeah.
66 days, reading every day, where you get in the habit, then you're more likely to just keep doing it because it's easier.
And one thing for me is, like, I after reading this book, I realized how important time blocking is, and that's something that Haley in particular likes to do. She's a little more organized, type A, than I am. Haley's my sister. But after reading this book, I realized how important it is, and that I was going to need to do it with my ever, increasingly busy life, getting married, buying a new house, renovations, whatever. So I started, the first thing I learned to time block was reading for an hour. So I really kind of credit this book and the importance of time blocking for me actually getting started on kind of the Lit journey before it became a podcast, and being able to time block, in the mornings. Usually I read from 8 to 9 in the morning, and I time block an hour to read for an hour, and that's how I'm able to kind of get the reading done I need to.
Yeah. Well, and he talks about a lot of really interesting things in here. When he talks about big is, big is, a lot of times people will say big is bad, that we're kind of conditioned that big is bad, but the reality is big is good. You got to think big and really
think big and start small.
Yeah, exactly. That's such a good way to put it. And, and I've got all my notes in my, I write all over the books. I know that drives you crazy, but for me, it's like, I think this is my book. So, I mean, like,
see, I like to give my books to other people. I like to,
Well, if I give this to somebody else, they're going to see some great notes. But one of the quotes that I love that he has in here is a quote by George Bernard Shaw, and it says, "Life isn't about finding yourself. Life is about creating yourself."
Yeah.
And I just think that is so awesome. I love that quote. Yeah. I just think that we don't realize that we are the master of our life, that we get to create, whatever we become, that we don't need to be the ship that goes out into the ocean that has no destination, that's just floating around and letting the tides take it where it wants. And that's what, unfortunately, I think, sadly, I think for too many people, they just kind of fall into a job, fall into a relationship. They kind of, whatever it is, they don't actually plan it out. And, when it was talking about in here, and it talks about so many great things. When it talks about, like, your stretch goals, first you have the goals that are doable, then you have the stretch goals, and then you have the possibility. And as you know, I'm getting ready to break ground here pretty soon on a really cool, unusual project. It's a mixed use where we'll have our office, our business, which is a commercial space on the lowest level, and then the second and third floor will be our residence, in North Beach. And that's like crazy to me. I mean, I do understand that other people I've talked to are like, wow, that's so, like, who does that?
Why are you doing that?
Why are you doing that? I have a fabulous home that I've, on 1 acre that I've had for 15 years now, and swimming pool, and life is good. Why, my house is almost paid off. Why do that? But for me, and I can only speak for myself, I look at life as, you get one shot.
Right.
This isn't a test run. You get one shot and then you're dead. The thought of, living in my house.
This is who raised me.
And just staying in one space and just coasting is just sickening to me. I know it
Yeah.
sounds terrible to say, probably, because I'm so blessed, and I do know that. But at the same time, I feel like I have to just
She's a
go.
freak.
Yeah, I know. I'm a bit of a freak. I just have to go and do and explore. And this book also, when I was reading it, and I know we need to kind of wrap it up so we don't go too long, but when I was reading it, I was cognizant of him talking about the journey, that you need to find happiness in the journey. So it's not
Right.
about finding happiness when you reach that big, huge goal. And believe me, what I'm doing right now is not the final goal. It's just the
It's
big goal
the
I'm working
next-
on right
yeah.
now. But in the journey, because I'm getting ready to move to a rental property that we have, sell my house, move temporarily there while the new place is being built. So it's going to be a really crazy 2020
Yeah.
for me,
Yeah.
like nuts. It's going to be stressful.
So if we stay with the Lit Grit, you have no excuse.
You can do it, trust me. Right? If I can do it this year, and you two moving also, then you can do it. Trust me. I mean, it's crazy, but it's worth the journey to delve into these topics and really push yourself and discover.
Yeah.
Not just like it says, not just find out who you are, but create who you
yeah.
are.
Yeah, that's a
So
great.
cool.
That's a great quote. That's a really great quote. And I think her place, I mean, it's a lot of work, but it's going to be totally worth it. And that's why I bought my new home in North Beach, because I'm going to be able to walk 2 blocks and go to the office.
And jog.
It's
Jog
gonna
down there.
yeah, walk my
Ride your
dog,
bike.
walk Brady. So it's gonna be really, really, it's gonna be worth it. But it is a lot right now. But it's a great adventure, and it's a
very
journey worth
stressful.
taking.
And I don't know how I'm gonna like living so close to other people. I've been in the suburbs for a very long time now, and used to like having a lot of space. It's gonna be nuts to have neighbors like.
So now you're really thinking, what the hell is she doing? Then?
Yeah, I know. Why am I? But how fun? How fun is life, right?
That's right.
And if I don't like it, trust me, then I'll I'll bob and weave, and I'll go buy something else and do something else, right? Okay. So what are we going to be doing? You can give the highlights.
So this is that
Yes,
same author as the Power of Habit, Charles Duhigg. One of my favorite authors. I think he's phenomenal. The way he interweaves different stories to kind of make it a page turner, keeps your interest, and gives you really good information. This is the second book he's written. I believe it's the second book. He just came out with this, I believe, last year. Smarter, Faster, Better. It's a great book. It's about tackling productivity and achieving your goals. Common theme throughout our thing, but it's a really, really fascinating book. It's a really good book. It breaks down like the SMART goals, specific, measurable, achievable, result-oriented, and time.
Okay, you don't need to give the whole like.
Whatever. But it's
in fact, I haven't read this one yet. You've read it.
Transformative Power of Real Productivity. It's a great book, and I'm really excited to read it.
So I will be reading this as well. I mean, most of these books I've already read. Like the one thing I read, but I read it a long time ago.
Yeah.
So it was and
I don't know about most of these books, but she's read it. We've each read.
Yeah. So it was great to reread this one because I got so much more out of it this second time around. It was so great. But I'm really excited to read this myself. So it's going to be very cool. So anyway, so let's wrap this up. Hopefully you are getting something out of the Lit Grit Challenge and reading some books, even if you're not reading all of these.
But read these books.
Read these books, yeah.
Stop giving them an out.
Yeah, I know. John, oh my God, that was a Freudian slip there. Connor was saying to me, don't tell people that they can read other nonfictions. Tell them they need to read these books. You did say that.
Is that how I talk, though?
Yeah, you talk just like that.
All right, guys, tune in next week for the Pitbull Patty Show. It's the Lit Grit Challenge.
Yeah, happy reading.